Filled with dark knowledge and forbidden magic, spellbooks found in the demiplane of Ravenloft are best left alone, safely rotting in the crypt of a long-dead necromancer. Both magic items and repositories of dark lore, these tomes are foul and dangerous, and today we will find out why. Let's open up the pages of the Revelations of the Prince of Twilight. Strange that such small books can cause such fear. But those in the know are wise to veil their existence, because once unearthed, they can lead to the creation of deadly cults who adhere to their contents and rituals contained within them. The Revelations of the Prince of Twilight is no exception. Penned by a Borcan monk in 702, it recounts the author's near-death experience with an omnipotent being known as the Prince of Twilight, and the knowledge about the nature of existence that was imparted to him. A revelation so profound that many would come to believe it could even negate the will of the dark powers itself. But how did a Borcan monk, Renthon Vorshtok, come to find himself on a Lemortian mountaintop? What twisted road led him there, and what exactly was he told that makes this tome so powerful? We will dig into all that, but first, let's talk about the physical appearance of the book. In spite of there being multiple handmade copies in existence out there, all of them look exactly the same. That's because they were all created by the same hand, Renthon himself. The exterior, crimson leather, made from the tanned hide of some unknown beast. It is supple and expertly crafted with pewter stitching holding it together. A crown of black is embossed on the cover, the lone identifying marker. Inside, you will find the words are written in stylish calligraphy with colorful illustrations of angels and cheerful-looking fairies bordering around all the pages. As the reader begins to turn the pages, they will notice something subtle but unsettling. The welcoming faces of the hand-drawn cherubs and the welcoming smile of the fairies will begin to warp and twist, growing more menacing and foreboding as the pages are turned. But why the stylistic change? While the book remains open, the weary reader who takes the time to turn back to the previous read sections will find to their surprise it is not in fact a stylistic change, but all the illustrations of the book now resemble their twisted manifestations. But that can't be. Shocked, they will shut the book. Shaken, mustering the courage, the curious bibliophile will reopen the book, only to find the cherubs and fairies have returned to their welcoming appearance. I'm sure it's no big deal. Let's examine what little we know about the author. Living in Borca, prior to when the Grand Conjunction forced its merge with Dorvinia, Renthon was driven from a young age to do something righteous with his life. Upon hearing the news that the ruler of Borca, Camille de Lisnia, had ordered a new temple be constructed in Levkarest, he left his home to join the construction efforts, following an almost supernatural pull. There he would meet a young man, Yakov de Lisnia, brother to Camille and the founder of the Church of Ezra. This would be who the new temple was being erected for. While there, the workers at the cathedral were the first people to be exposed to a new religious tome being penned by Yakov, the Book of Ezra. Renthon would be deeply affected by these teachings. The stories of this woman named Ezra who stood up to the darkness of the mist, who reached out to heal the wounded and feed the needy, they were what he was looking for, what he aspired to be. But it wasn't until the first official service at the unfinished cathedral in 1695 that Renthon would officially begin the process of becoming an ordained monk in the rapidly growing Church of Ezra. Almost immediately, though, it was as if a switch had been thrown and Renthon began performing miracles and healing plagues at an alarming rate. That is to say, others in the church were quite concerned about his meteoric rise. It would take only 4 years before he was cast out of the order, forced to leave Borca and wander the mist. In his own words, this is what he had to say about that. "Sadly, as my fame and power grew, my brethren refused to recognize my greatness, and failed to grant me the position that was mine by right. In time, their blindness grew until they considered me not a saint and a visionary, but a heretic and a blasphemer." This event would catapult him on his journey to an even more significant experience, one that in his mind put him on par with Ezra herself, the meeting with the Prince of Twilight. It's important for this next part that everyone is clear on exactly what Ravenloft is. Otherwise, what truths Renthon, and vicariously we the readers, learn may not have the same impact. Through the changes and additions from the Weekend in Hell to the fully formed fleshed out core, and then back to the uncoupled Islands of the Mist, at its heart, Ravenloft has always been a prison for evil. A demiplane existing outside of time and space where souls are taken from their place of origin and tucked away for the rest of their existence. The place is easy to get to, but nearly impossible to escape. Many have tried, but so few do that their deeds are considered the stuff of legend. The dark powers clearly have the scales tipped in their favor. But what could have Renthon learned while on exile that could rebalance those scales, even strike a blow to the very essence of the Domain of Dread? I'm going to let him explain in his own words. The following is taken directly from the introduction of the book.
One night near the darkest times of the year, in the cold mountains of Lemordia where I nearly froze to death, the Prince of Twilight came to me, saving me from the elements. He revealed to me many secrets of our land. I came to learn that we have been separated from half of what we were meant to be. Through the proper rites and sacrifices, we can call our other halves from the void in which they dwell. And once that is done, we gain the power to reshape all things, people and objects, the very land itself, to fit our needs. Many, the prince told me, would reject this, fearing the changes their brighter sides may bring to their lives. Those few who would embrace their sundered souls, though, would know their true destiny. It would be my task, my holy charge, to set these truths down in writing. At the beginning, we were meant to have two spirits, one mortal, the other supernatural. Those who sought success within this world were to be bound a spirit of the land, while the seekers or servants of power above would receive an angelic soul, as well as a human one. Sadly, our souls were sundered by dark and jealous powers, with bitter halves cast into a misty void where they are forced to watch us suffer, as we are deprived of their aid and tormented by evil fiends. When the proper summonings are made, though, we can regain the lost fragment of our souls, and after long service in which we bring our spirits into conformity with theirs, we can return to our original blessed state.
The implications of this are staggering and raise an awful lot of questions. Were the people in Ravenloft merely half souls trapped in the misty void? Was it possible that a part of everyone still existed someplace else? Or what if the only reason the powers had sway over inhabitants was because they were missing the bright part of themselves, and by reunifying they would be able to negate the effects of the mist and reshape the world for themselves? Vorshtok would go on and describe the two rituals in detail. The first being the Conjure Sundered Soul ritual, the second being the Spirit Reunification.
To begin this cycle, someone trained in the priestly arts must conjure the first spirit. He may summon his own counterpart, or that of a friend or a loved one. Upon the summoning, the first step towards reunification can begin. The mortal side of the being receives great powers that he may use to help further his desires and to bring others to the knowledge of their lost spirits. Once sufficient time has passed and sufficient sacrifices have been made, the two spirits exist in harmony and may become one once again.
According to Renthon, the spell Conjured Sundered Soul would allow a mortal being's lost soul to be located and summoned from its place of banishment. The second rite contained in the book permits the culmination of the spiritual unity between a mortal and his lost spiritual half. Once it is completed, the new being will be glorious and powerful, capable of seizing whatever it desires. That spell was known as the Spirit's Reunification. Immediately after the encounter on the mountain, realizing how monumental this was and now imbued with new divine purpose, Renthon traveled to the domain of Reshmilo. Settling in, he began to pen his first copies, and would continue to hand-make the same book until the time of the Grand Conjunction in 740. In that 35-year period, he would make and distribute an estimated 3,000 copies. At the time of his disappearance, there were still 1,000 copies sitting on the shelves in his home library. Had Renthon become the victim of the Grand Conjunction as so many did? Or was he able to, after all those years, complete the rituals and reconnect his soul to escape the prison of Ravenloft? Despite what we would consider for the circumstances, its mass production and wide distribution, finding a copy now can be difficult. And it's not because it's become the masses' ticket out of hell. In fact, both the Church of Ezra and Bane have condemned it, Ezra calling it a danger to the faith and the souls of every reader, and the Banonites going as far as to say it's subversive and blasphemous to the true order of the universe. Wyan, an Inquisitor leader in Tempest, burns a copy every year at the turn of the calendar. But why? Jealousy? Is it because they still see Renthon as the overachieving slap in the face like they did when he was kicked out of the Order? Well, truth in the demi-plane of dread is as hard to come by as an easy escape route. When your whole essence is enveloped in darkness and evil, things are rarely what they seem. And yet some poor souls are about to find that out the hard way. Luckily for you and I, we can peer beyond the mists and see the truth. And as it turns out, the evil of the mist still remains undefeated. Scholars have long wondered who or what Renthon had encountered that night in Lamordia, and the only thing they know for sure is it wasn't a benevolent or helpful being. No, in fact it was more likely a vampire, or perhaps a Lord of the Dark Fae, or even a fiend from one of the Nether Realms, because the reality of those rituals and what they actually accomplish are a far cry from what Renthon and any of his cultists believe. Now, in actuality, they're there in order to call forth evil spirits and give them full permission to occupy the participant's body. Reunification actually equals possession. Let's take a closer look at what the individual spells actually do. Conjured Sundered Soul, once cast, will send out a call across the demiplane, alerting fiends, dark fae, and spirits to the fact that there is a person ripe for corruption and possession. The type of creature it alerts will depend on who the victim is. Most normal folk or low-level warriors and rogues can find themselves greeted by a Borway, a tiny, semi-transparent, greenish-skinned creature with mint leaves on their head instead of hair. Or perhaps a Bobahan Sith, a 2-foot-tall pixie-like creature with wings like a cicada. Or even a good old-fashioned disembodied ghost. Wizards, clerics, sorcerers who have a little bit more of a larger power set could conjure up an imp or a quasit or some other type of creature from the lower planes. Usually these creatures will appear incorporeal to both the victim and the person helping them perform the ritual to really sell the lie. If they do appear in the flesh, they will most likely take a pleasing form as to not arouse suspicion. When discussing this, remember that the victim isn't the one who casts the ritual. There has to be a separate person for that. Here's why that's important. The spell also grants the summoned being a degree of control over the caster as well. Both of them become charmed by the spirit. They both believe that his spiritual half is now present, a divine being feeding them useful information, providing them with great power and wisdom. The target will now manifest new powers and new abilities, never once considering that they are being duped, pushing them on to continue to make the process permanent and make them whole once again. Now, looking at the second spell, Spirit Reunification, that actually works like a sophisticated and subtle soul-trapping spell. It can be cast only by and only on someone bound to the spirit via the conjured summon soul spell. To do this, you need a gem of at least 1,000 gold pieces. When the spell is complete, the target's soul will be trapped inside the gem and it will act as a phylactery of sorts, while the spirit inhabits the body. But that's not all. The creature, if it had a body, will now be able to freely move in between its new body and the old one, and also shuttle the victim in and out of the gem with just a thought. Any of the spirits can make full use of all of its powers while in the new form, but it cannot use any of the victim's spells or abilities. Because of this drawback, they will usually spend a good deal of time studying the person beforehand to be able to impersonate them without arousing suspicion. Even now, after having the soul removed, being put into a gem, and having somebody else control your body, the target still believes that he has done the right thing and he is now whole. Bright and colorful is the road to hell. Okay, so now it's crunch time. At this point, I'd just like to look at how some of these things operate mechanically in case you want to use this book in your game. My first bit of advice is that I think the revelations would work best as a plot device rather than an in-game item. Maybe having a cult obsessed with Renthon, searching out and collecting copies of the book. Maybe a different cult is going from town to town spreading the revelations to the people, snatching up souls left and right. Maybe the Church of Ezra hires out a group to travel back in time to the point where the visitation originally took place, either to stop it or to solve once and for all who was communicating with Renthon. That's where I think the true value is. Seeing how it's a spell book and it could be written in, I wonder what would happen if you were to pass it along to one of your PCs playing a wizards and they could use it as a spell book. If you're going to use it as an in-game item, here's some of the details that I left out earlier. In regards to the Conjure Sundered Soul spell, in game terms, the victim becomes a priest in the service of the bound spirit, drawing powers from their own faith, the powers and supernatural nature of the spirit, and from other spirits the patron is able to aid from. Basically, 0-level characters become first-level priests, while those who already have a class become multi-classed with 1 level in the priest class. Those who are already priests gain both their normal spells and the spells granted by their new friend, but the spirit will usually lure the priest away from his original patron before too long. These priests receive access to the charm and summoning spheres as well as one other sphere appropriate to the spirit involved. A bloodthirsty Quasit, for example, might grant the combat sphere, while a spirit of shadows and darkness could give the caster the revised versions of spells from the sun sphere. Priestly combat values, saving throws, and hit dice are also acquired, as the spirit encourages the new servant to acquire the skills needed to defend our land from those who would rob us of our destiny. These priests can reach 7th level in their new class, but advancing is not easy. In addition to spending time with the spirit, a victim must also perform some service or make some sacrifice before the spirit increases their powers. The services often cut the slave off from the rest of society. And if you're playing the 2nd edition game, they may actually be calls for a powers check. And the sacrifices are things dear to the victim. While the process of raising the victim to the proper levels continues, the spirit also encourages the devoted servant to recruit more individuals that they may know. The joy of oneness. This bond can be broken with a Dispel Evil or a Holy Word spell, which banishes the spirit and breaks its hold over the victim's soul. It can be most difficult to convince the victim to let the spell be cast, though, even if the spirit is prevented from interfering. The hold these spirits have over their servants tightens with each sacrifice given or command obeyed. By the time the priest reaches 7th level, his patron's spirit means everything to him. At this point, it's time for the use of the 2nd spell contained in Revelations, the Spirit Reunification. Now, I also think if you were running a 5th edition game, this will work well with the Warlock class too, that you could have the Warlock be the one that calls forth the other spirit. At the risk of repeating myself and being redundant, like we mentioned before, the Spirit Reunification spell acts a lot like a subtle soul trapping spell. It can only be cast by and on someone bound to a spirit of the Conjure Sundered Soul spell. It also requires a gem of at least 1,000 gold pieces as its material component. When the casting of the spell is complete, the caster's soul is drawn into the jewel, while the spirit now inhabits the caster's body. If the spirit had a body, and most fiends in Dark Fate do, it can switch at will between the mortal's body and its own, and can likewise switch the mortal soul from its original body to the Phylactery with just a thought. Bodiless spirits can inhabit the mortal's body until such time as they decide to leave it, and they can come back to it unless precautions are taken. Any spirit can make use of all of its powers from within the mortal's body. While they don't have access to the victim's skills or abilities, if they've spent enough time with the victim, they can make a convincing imitation. These possessing spirits can be driven out through a Dispel Evil or a Holy Word spell. Once that's done, placing the gem housing the caster's soul on the body's chest is enough to reunify the two. To prevent a second possession by the same spirit, the Phylactery must be shattered, and then remove curse and atonement spells must be cast on the victim, or else the spirit can return and usurp the mortal's body at will. In addition, many of the victims freed from this spell slip into a deep depression, believing that they actually were reunited with their lost half, and now that's all over with. Other than altering who can cast a spell and what counts as a prerequisite for being able to do so, There isn't much you have to do to bring this up to 5th edition standards. It's pretty much plug and play. I would keep in mind, though, that these people who are casting this totally believe that they are doing the right thing and doing a good thing, so maybe keep it out of the hands of the Death Cleric, at least at first. Filled with dark knowledge and forbidden magics, spellbooks found in the demiplane of Ravenloft are best left alone, safely rotting in the crypt of a long-dead necromancer. Well, the revelations of the Prince of Twilight is no different. With its shape-shifting cherubs bordering its pages and promises of restoring your soul, it preys on the weak and the wanton, snatching up souls and stealing what little life and free will is left in the demiplane of dread. So remember, if anybody comes to you claiming that they read of an easy way out of Ravenloft, you run from that. Because the Dark Powers didn't just write the book. They are the entire library. And nobody's checking out until they say so. Thank you all sincerely for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you like what we do here with the Lore channel, please consider liking and subscribing. We're going to try to get a video out at least once a week, dealing with some hidden aspects of D&D lore that you may not be aware of. I love making these, and your continued support will enable me to continue to do so. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say thank you to George von Zarovich from MIstfactor Press. George has put together almost 800 pages worth of information about the Domains of Dread, updated for 5th edition. Soon they will be available for purchase on the DM's Guild. George was the one who originally gave me the information on the revelations of the Prince of Twilight. Without his influence, this video probably would not have been made. So if you want to engage on more Ravenloft discussions, find myself, George, and a whole bunch of other good people over at the Mist of Ravenloft group on Facebook. I will leave a link for that in the description. Also, I'm live every Thursday night. If you want to catch me on Up Late with the Dungeon Master, subscribe to our live channel. Link for that is in the description too. As always, in the game of life, may you always roll with advantage, and you will see me in the next video.